story of the origin of our congregation goes with the story of the vocation and spiritual growth of our foundress, Elisabeth Gruyters. Elisabeth Gruyters was born and baptized on November 1, 1789, in the village of Leuth, Belgian Limburg. Although Elisabeth lived in a dangerous and anti-Catholic environment, she had already established a close connection with God. Elisabeth left for Maastricht. The effects of the French Revolution in Maastricht then were very visible. Monasteries and convents were closed. Churches were used for military purposes. The people were generally suffering from poverty because of terrible plunder. In 1821, Elisabeth first worked as a housekeeper with Baron de Roos-Waldeck family, and later with the wealthy Naples family. After a few years of her stay in Maastricht, some churches, although badly damaged, were reopened to accommodate the faithful who came to pray and worship God. She was one of the frequent visitors of the churches of Saint Servatius, Saint Matthias, and Saint Nicholas, where the image of Mary, Star of the Sea, was honored. Every Sunday afternoon during her free time, she went to visit the poor and sick people of Calvarienburg Institute to pray the rosary with them. The sufferings and pains of the people there had always occupied her mind, even while she was already back to her work. As what she personally wrote in her story, amidst many tears, she sent her prayers to heaven to allow her to perform works of charity for those miserable people in Calvarienburg. Although she worked as a housekeeper in Naples' family, she also played a significant role in their lives. She took care of the paralyzed wife of Mr. Naples for 7 years. On her deathbed, Elisabeth was able to convince her to have her general confession and to receive the sacrament of the sick. That was quite extraordinary then, because for many years the family isolated themselves from God and the Church. She also spent much time in prayer and tears for the conversion of Mr. Naples. After 10 years, he was converted. As the years of her life in Maastricht passed, Elisabeth was more convinced that the city needs a convent that would take care of the needy and the oppressed, a group of religious who would serve God honestly and in perfection. It didn't matter to her what congregation it could be, or whatever rules there might be, as long as God would be served through His people, like the sick in Calvarienburg, the children working in the factory, and those living in the streets. Much as she would love to take part on it, but her age was already a great disadvantage. However, she did not lose hope. As times passed, her love for God grew deeper. She often wrote in her book that she could not find enough words to describe clearly how she experienced the presence of God. Once, while she prayed before the crucifix, her heart was burning with love for God, that she stammered to pray these words: Beloved and lover of my heart, in your suffering give me part. Love's burning flame in me release, that to your service I may be capable, not just for my own profit, but also for my neighbor's salvation. Since then, she had been praying this every day, which was later became the prayer of the entire congregation. On one glorious day of Mary's Assumption, she attended Mass in St. Nicholas Church. During the Mass, her great and ardent desire grew deep within her, that she did not hear or see anything of the solemn celebration. She then knelt in front of the miraculous image of Mary, Star of the Sea, and prayed. In her prayer, she did not ask anymore that she would be admitted in a convent. Rather, she prayed that a convent be established in Maastricht, where God will be served faithfully. In this state of being, her faith grew deeper and her hope grew stronger. A burning love, expressed in sweet tears, granted her a peaceful rest. Suddenly she heard the blessed yes from heaven, and that yes was no other than this: all things will come. In December of that same year, she went to St. Matthias Church to have her confession with Reverend Father Mayel. As a result, she was inspired to go and offer herself to join the newly established convent in Lincoln Street. After her confession, she told her plan to her confessor. But he gave her no hope. He pointed out that she was already advanced in age, did not have enough talents and money. Most of all, there would also be many who would present themselves besides her. It took her 8 days before she got the courage to introduce herself to Reverend Father Van Baer. Trembling all over, she followed him to the sacristy after he celebrated Mass. She introduced herself and informed him of her desire to be admitted to the newly founded convent as a lay religious. But he told her that there would be no distinction among the sisters. All of them would be working together as sisters of charity. Then he accepted her as a sister of charity of Saint Vincent de Paul. He told her confidently that she was the first who presented herself with which he dared to start a convent. On April 29, 1837, the feast of St. Peter Martyr, God gave Mother Elisabeth and Sister Maria courage and strength to start their work. They took notice of all the comments of the people, that they were poor and that the city of Maastricht had been closed for 6 years already. Yet full of faith and hope, they began to clean the rented house in Lincoln Street. They were lacking many things, that they did not even have a chair to sit on. Neither did they have a heater to keep their small house warm. Father Van Baer had sent 2 sisters from Den Bosch, Sister Teresa and Sister Francisca, who taught Mother Elisabeth and Sister Maria the ways of being a religious and helped them in their new ministries. In May 1837, they began to admit poor children in the corridor of St. Servatius Church. They taught them catechism and needlework, how to pray and how to love God. The Lord blessed their undertakings. The number of children increased daily. Filled with much work, the 4 sisters needed more help. On October 5 of the same year, the sisters received more help when Sister Anna entered the convent. They were overjoyed of her entrance. But on October 10, 1837, the 2 sisters from Den Bosch were asked to return to their own community immediately. They received news that the Reverend Superior was mortally ill. Mother Elisabeth thought then that it was the end of their convent. She felt that fishes out of water without any aid and support. Sometimes people came to their community just to discourage them, but they continued to put their confidence and trust in God's providence. On March 1, 1839, Sister Coletta started to work in the Roman Catholic orphanage. After several years, more sisters came to work there too. It was very difficult for them at the start. There was no peace and harmony among them. The situation lasted for more than 16 years. Mother Elisabeth always encouraged the sisters to be patient and to put Jesus' suffering before their eyes. In 1857, Father Schrijven, the new parish and dean of St. Servatius Church, scrutinized and examined closely the zeal and good intentions of the sisters. Finally, it was decided that sisters would carry out the responsibility of taking the spiritual and temporal welfare of the orphan. Her longing to serve the sick people in Calvary and Berg had always been a concern for Mother Elisabeth. So, with an increasing number of sisters, she became more courageous to offer their services to the Institute. But the Board of Trustees was totally against the idea. One member even swore that, as long as he was in charge, they would never be admitted. He commented further that the religious dress was more than enough to make the suffering person ill. A short time later, when the said person died, Mother Elisabeth tried again. The chaplain of the Institute also urged the board to admit the sisters. By experience, Mother Elisabeth knew that the atmosphere among the sick and the dying was full of antipathy, hatred, envy, and reproach. Although the board was still reluctant, they were pressured by the people to accept the services of the sisters in the Institute. So on August 1, 1843, 5 sisters started their ministry in Calvary and Berg. These good religious were so contented that they could assist the poor patients day and night. Gradually, the board started to appreciate their efforts, that they even asked for more sisters. And with all the improvements in the Institute, more sisters were sent to work there. In 1840, the congregation transferred from the rented house in Lincoln Street to their newly purchased house in Friedhof. But in order to accommodate the growing number of sisters, a house behind the St. Servatius Church was purchased in 1844. The house was formerly part of the church constructed around the 12th century. It was connected by arches built as a passageway for the priests and other church leaders. For that reason, the arches that connects the church and the newly occupied house of the sisters was already familiar to the people. Since then, the Sisters of Charity was known in Netherlands as Zusters onder de bogen, or Sisters under the arches. The arches also gave a symbolic meaning to the sisters, to be an instrument of connecting the church and the world, a congregation that bridges God and humankind. To this date, the sisters are officially known as the Sisters of Charity of St. Charles Borromeo of Maastricht. St. Charles Borromeo was the Archbishop of Milan in the 16th century. He was not only known for his zeal in implementing the decisions of the Council of Trent, but also for the charity with which he put them into practice. During the plague that struck Milan in 1576, he took care of the patients. He always brought Holy Communion to them, even at the expense of his life. His spirituality and ideals in living out the gospel had inspired the sisters to continue their works of charity. In the newly approved rules and statutes, the purpose of the congregation was clearly formulated. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and your neighbor as yourself for God. The religious of this institute commit themselves in seeking the glory of God zealously, by striving for holiness of life, and by performing various works of charity for their neighbors in their needs and distress. On June 26, 1864, Mother Elisabeth finally met the beloved and lover of her heart. She died at the age of 74 and was buried in the cemetery of the present St. Peter and Paul Church in Wolder, Maastricht. The total number of the sisters at the time of her death were 54, not including those who have died ahead of her. After the death of Mother Elisabeth, her inspiration was transferred to other women who, just like her, moved to serve God faithfully through His people. The expansion of the congregation outside the Netherlands started on the initiative of Father Sondal S.J. In 1913, he started to dream of a Catholic hospital in Netherlands, Oost-India, presently known as Indonesia. The idea was also supported and encouraged by Monsignor Luypen, then bishop in Indonesia. He requested a religious congregation to take care of the health ministry in Batavia, presently known as Jakarta. With the recommendation of the then Bishop of Roermond, the congregation accepted the invitation of sending sisters to Indonesia. Filled with zeal and willingness to serve God, 10 sisters left the Netherlands on June 22, 1918. Because of war, their boat had to pass through different roads, several countries. Finally, on October 7, 1918, after almost 4 months of traveling, 10 sisters set foot ashore on their new homeland, Indonesia. Amidst all the difficulties in starting a new convent in a new land, the sisters never gave up hope. They continued to persevere in their works of charity, primarily in healthcare and Christian education. The Lord blessed their efforts that on January 22, 1919, St. Carolus Hospital in Jakarta was opened. Within a short time, the sisters responded to the invitation of the Church to set up new branches of ministries in the field of healthcare and education in other places of Indonesia. For this reason, the number of CB missionaries from the Netherlands increased every year. The sacrifices of the pioneering sisters were great, and their faith was convincing. Thus, their presence and witnessing appeared to be a tool to generate vocations to religious life among the young girls from various groups in the society. On February 2, 1933, the novitiate in Yogyakarta was officially opened. In 1942, Indonesia was under Japanese occupation. The congregation then was in a very critical situation. CB sisters of Dutch origin were put in prison. While the imprisoned sisters lived in misery, the Indonesian sisters also faced the great and difficult task of continuing the works of charity of the congregation. With an increase in membership of Indonesian sisters, CB Indonesia was declared a province of the congregation in 1967.